Hey everybody, welcome to Hollywood Live. I am so excited about my guest today, the inimitable Charles M. Blow, who joined the New York Times way back in 1994. He's been an opinion columnist since 2008. I told him it's all my life. He's also a television commentator and a best-selling author with that book, The Devil You Know, which has now been turned into an HBO documentary. Charles Blow, welcome to Hollywood Live.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. There is so much to talk about, including your recent column this week in the New York Times, but we want to talk about the documentary, South to Black Power. You were a New Yorker for more than 25 years, and then you moved to Atlanta 4 years ago because you're thinking that that's the only way we will get Black Power back is to move from the North back to the South. Tell me about what you mean about all that in your premise.
Well, I won't say it's the only way, but it is the way that I think most feasible. What I am suggesting is that as many people as possible do what many young people are already doing, which is to reverse the Great Migration and return from cities in the North and West to cities in the South. And I say that because right after the Civil War, 3 Southern states were majority Black, and 3 others were within 8 percentage points of being majority Black. And that produced a lot of Black power on the state level. And if those, Black people had not been forced to leave because of terror or economic conditions, then what would America and Black power look like today with Black people actually having a controlling interest in some of those states? State power is hugely important to any sort of power, because it's called the United States for a reason, because states have half the power. The Constitution explicitly says any power, first of all, it divides up the powers, and then any power that is not divided up in writing is reserved for the states. So it's hugely important, and it's important also for a lot of the things that Black people care about, like criminal justice reform. Most of the criminal code that Black people are going to come into contact with is actually state criminal code. You may not ever end up before a federal judge, but you might end up trying to plead that ticket, before a local judge.
Yeah, that's very true. So, it's interesting because you were actually born in the South, and so many people who went to the North for opportunities, at least what we thought were opportunities, and you certainly got one. I mean, I think you are one of the best opinion writers in the last 2 or 3 generations, to be honest. We haven't had a lot, but you are it. And that wouldn't have happened, I don't think, if you had perhaps stayed in Louisiana and not gone to New York and become as sophisticated and well-written and well-read as you are. Do you think?
Well, I always say this to people. There are some industries that are region specific. So if you are a computer coder, it may make sense for you to be in Silicon Valley. If you are a fashion designer, it may make sense for you to be in New York. If you are in publishing, as I am, where all the major magazines are published out of New York, the biggest newspaper, 2 of them, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, are published in New York, and all of the big television news networks, and now all of the cable news channels are broadcasting out of New York City. That makes sense regionally for the specific industry. But I like to talk to people for whom that is not the reality. People for whom their work would allow them to work anywhere. You have more flexibility, and for them, I make this argument.
Okay. So, it's very interesting because a lot of what we are going through now in America has to do with political power or lack of. And I got to tell you something. I did watch the entire documentary. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I agree with most of your premises, mainly the one that we need to stop hoping and praying that it's going to get better. We need to just step in and take our power and take what we own, which really is pretty much this country, because we built a country, 400 years of free labor. Anybody would get over with that. All of that being said, what do we do about the people who live in certain regions that you spoke with, about the people who are not going to get up and move to the South? And you're right, a lot of young people did. Let me tell you something. 20 years ago, people ran out of Hollywood. I live in LA. People ran out of Hollywood down to Atlanta, and look what they've created down there. And I get that. And plus we got the housewives, because everybody moved down there really so they could get a big mansion. Let's keep it real. That's the reason they left LA, because they knew they weren't going to get that, and they got it in Atlanta. And now we got the housewives. But all of that being said, other than like moving to a place like Atlanta, I mean, you've got folks in there from Jackson, Mississippi. You've got a lot of places in the South in this documentary where people have moved to from the North and done well. But then you've got the naysayers. So what is it about this proposal that would make somebody who's maybe on the edge or on the fence think, maybe that's not such a bad idea to move to Jackson, Mississippi?
Well, first of all, most mass migrations in the country and in the world have come for two reasons: either safety or economics. Many of the mass migrations in America were around economic opportunities. The Great Migration was largely spurred by economic opportunities. The boll weevil infestation in the South had collapsed the cotton economy, and northern recruiters from factories were in the South recruiting workers, and they were including Black workers. And so there was an opportunity. You have to remember that, Black people had tolerated, 6 decades of terrorism at that point and still not moved, right? So the economic push added to the terror that was an incentive to move. What is happening? One thing that you described in in that question was about home ownership. One thing that is happening right now is the reverse migration is happening at the same time as another great migration, which is young college-educated white children, white young adults, are reversing decisions that their parents and grandparents made and just choosing to move back into cities. That gentrification is putting a lot of pressure on urban environments, raising prices, sometimes even increasing police presences in neighborhoods where it wasn't as much pressure on them. And that puts a lot of economic pressure on people in those places. And they look around and say, I cannot afford to buy a home here, but I can afford to buy it somewhere else. And that is one of the reasons why the South does so well, southern cities do so well on the list about where Black people are doing best, because they're able to generate wealth by home ownership. And it's just not possible very often in many of the northern and western cities.
Yeah, it really is. Certainly here in California, it is no longer, it's not even a thing that people can think about. If you're not already in that space, it's like, young people are not going to be able to do that. And gentrification, as you know, everywhere, especially here in other big cities, is a problem, which you didn't exactly get the reverse of that. You didn't exactly get into totally in the documentary. But, I think, Charles, I'm just gonna be real. I think Black people are confused. In your column this week, you're talking about Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And why isn't Joe Biden, by any standard of any bit of common sense, he should be ahead. Just because, if no other reason, Trump has been indicted on all of these criminal charges. And I mean, we could go on and on. But yet, you mentioned, and I put my glasses on so I can actually see. You mentioned, rapper Sexy Red, who was talking about how Black people started loving Trump because he was letting us out of prison and giving stimulus checks. So they thought that's where it was coming from. So I think that there are a lot of younger people that are really on that tip right now, where they're like, okay, Donald Trump was getting people out. Should we, I got my boy still up there in prison. If he's elected again, you think he might get out? Is that what we're looking at here?
Well, I think there are multiple things happening at once, and you have to look at each one of them as, even if they move the percentages, maybe 1 or 2 percentage points, that becomes something that adds up over time. So for instance, the Sexy Red example is a low engagement voter, not fully understanding who was actually for the stimulus checks and who was against them. Donald Trump and Republicans were actually against, fighting very hard to not have this happen. Democrats pushed it through, then Trump, realizing it had to go through anyway, put his name on them. People associated the checks with him, even though he had been fighting against them, right? So that's just a low engagement voter, but that is a real thing that's happening. So let's say 1, 2, 3% people are those low engagement voters shifting because of that reason. You have another group of people who look at the Gaza situation now, compare what has happened to the Palestinians in Gaza, to, you know, some parallel, not perfect parallel, but some parallel to kind of a Jim Crow America and the struggles that Black people had, and they are also unhappy with Biden. So maybe you take 1, 2, 3% people maybe moving around for that reason, or maybe just staying home for that reason, not necessarily moving. Then there are also other reasons, like there are a percentage of Black people, relatively small, but also who don't want any more immigration, think that's a bad idea, think that there's, you know, that it's a zero-sum game, that if you let those people in, they're fighting for the very job that I have. I don't want it. So any, that animates them. So it just becomes like these little slivers, but it only takes 1 or 2 percentage points of this group, 1 percentage point, 2% of that group, and it just starts to add up over time. And then you get into a situation where what this particular poll says, which can change, of course, but this particular poll says, you've had a erosion of support among non-white supporters of Joe Biden. That's a real thing that we need to, deal with, and Joe Biden needs to deal with, and that Black people are grappling with.
So who's doing these polls? And which one should we pay attention? Because sometimes I'm like, okay, I try to pay attention. Okay, who did this poll? Where is this even coming from? Because we are living in such a world of misinformation. Who knows if the polls are telling the truth?
Right. So any poll is a snapshot in time. It is scientific, but it is, nothing is absolute. So any given poll to be legitimate, it's only about 1,000 people, right? So you'll see maybe 1,000, maybe 1,200, but it's not, 100,000 people responding to these polls. It's about 1,000 people. They try to kind of make sure they're relative samples of the population. So you can get some fluctuation from poll to poll. What people generally do now is that there's so many polls that you can all lump them all together and average them out. So what they're trying to do is to average out any fluctuation. So what you probably should focus on is the poll of polls. A lot of people do these now. And it just averages all those together, and it gives a more reliable number.
So looking at these numbers and thinking about your idea, which is, a very interesting idea. And it's not, gosh, Marcus Garvey wanted us to go back to Africa, and now Charles Blow wants us to go back to the South. So, it's not exactly a new idea, but it's certainly very interesting. And it could possibly make a difference in numbers and getting people out to vote. But I think, because there are people, there are some people that never have had that experience. My mother's family was from Iowa. My dad's family was from Canada. Okay, so we really did not have that Southern experience. However, I do see a lot of people now moving back, people that grew up the same way I did, that are going there. They don't have any land down there, but I guess they went down and bought some. So I don't think that it is totally out of the the box of our thinking. But what should we do? Because most of us are not going to get down there by November of 2024. And we need to figure out something so that our voting numbers are up. Maybe it takes people like you to go out and talk to rappers or talk to whomever that think that Donald Trump, because I'm just going to say, we'll lose the democracy. I'm just going to go out and say it. If he's elected again, that's my opinion. We will lose our democracy, certainly as we know it. So how do we get people engaged for 2024?
Well, one thing that I will say is that this plan is a Black power plan. It is not a partisan plan. It is not for Democrats. It is not for Republicans. It's for Black people. And the second thing that I will say is that it is a long-term idea. It is not necessarily about the next election cycle, though it may benefit the next election cycle. The reason that Biden won Georgia, and you got two Democratic senators in Georgia, one Black and one Jewish, was because they have a coalition led by Black people. But those Black people have been moving here for 3 decades. And you got more Black people, and Stacey Abrams and other groups with their massive turnout machine was able to tap into all these new people showing up. But it is a generational shift. You have to remember that the Great Migration played out from the mid-1910s to 1970.
Yeah.
Right? So that's over 5 decades of movement. We can't expect the reverse migration to happen on a flash or a snap of a finger. You have to think about what do you want primarily, and this is what I think about. What do I want for my children?
Right.
What kind of world, what kind of America do I want for my children? The cases you mentioned before were Black nationalist plans, people who wanted a separate place for Black people. What I'm saying here is that I want my children to benefit from what Black people built in America. That I don't want to be separate from America. I want to be stronger in America. I want them to benefit from my ancestors and their ancestors and all the blood and sweat that they put in this country. We shouldn't have to run away from that. We should be able to capitalize on that. And they did put in most of that blood and sweat right here in the South.
Yeah, they did.
So so that is a bit of the difference.
And that is part of the problem with people wanting not to move back to the South, because those wounds are still deep. And let's face it, white supremacy is still going strong in everywhere. I mean, all over America. And so I know, in your book, the devil, that's part of it. Okay, we know these folks are racist down here, so just come on back and just deal with it the way we've always dealt with it, But what do you want people to glean from the documentary? And it really is. I want everybody to know it's a must see, I have to say.
Well, first, before I get to that, I want to say this: racism is everywhere in America, and I want us not to regionalize it, but to nationalize it. It literally exists everywhere, and some of the places where I've seen the levers of power, particularly in policing and the judicial system, work most heavily against Black people, were in places that were northern and western cities. Stop and frisk was not a thing in Jackson, Mississippi, or Atlanta. It was a thing in LA, and Chicago, and New York. And the citizens of those places agreed with it and approved it. Mm-hmm. So when people talk to me about, it's so bad, racism is so bad and stuff, I'm like, racism is so bad everywhere, including in your backyard that you think is so liberal. You can be liberal and want women to get an abortion, be able to get an abortion, have access to it. You can be liberal and want gay people to get married. You can be liberal and want to save the planet, and also not be a racial egalitarian. So I always think we have to separate liberalism from Black success, liberty, and power. That said, the thing that I hope that people take away from the documentary is to see the possibilities, to see a glimpse of the world. What I did in the book was to set forth a theory. The documentary allowed me to road test it. I put it in front of actual people living in different parts of the country, particularly people living in different parts of the South, and you see people wrestle with it. The point is not to have them all agree with me, but the point is to wrestle with the question. And it is fascinating to me to watch people really think about what it would look like for Black people to be in a position where they don't have to plead and march and demand that power actually responds and respects them, but actually be able to do it themselves in the voting booths because they have the numerical advantage and they have the power. That's just a big shift for people to make, to even think of it as a real possibility, not a fantastical thing.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's a big one, but you never know. You never know what's going to happen in history. You never know what's going to happen. And this is a good theory. I really commend you for, again, coming up with this idea and putting it out there to people to just think, because what I always say is, at the end of the day, you want to have something. You don't want to just see something or experience. You want to be able to think about it. Right. The things that are important are things that when you see or hear them, it makes you go, yes. How about that?
Yes, I will take that I put it out this time, but I will always make sure that I say, I'm not the first person to even think of this. The Republic of New Africa was thinking this exact same thing when they moved to Jackson, Mississippi, in the 70s. So This is not a new thing. I just think that it can work for Black people, particularly now that they're already doing the thing. They just need a boost.
Right, right, absolutely. And it's funny, I've been around long enough to remember when all those folks did go down there in the 70s. I'd forgotten about that, to tell you the truth, until I saw the documentary. And I was like, oh, I kind of remember that. But good for you. Again, we always celebrate you, and I've been following you for a long time because I respect your opinions and I love your writing, and you just lay it out there. You don't even care.
Thank
And
you
I
so much.
I love that. I did like the way you kind of ended the documentary, though, and I'm going to ask you the question again. So you mentioned your children. You're the father of 3, I believe. And we look up now, and again, like I said, I can't imagine what's going to happen if this doesn't all work out next year the way that I want it to work out, and many people that I know want it to work out. But for those of us who have children or grandchildren, what is it that we need to be telling them, and just some of the young people especially, about getting out to vote? I don't know what to say anymore. We've had so many campaigns and I don't know if it's working. What would you say? What do we need to do?
Well, yes, listen, the threat is very real. No one knows what's going to happen a year from now. So a year is an eternity in politics. We don't know if Trump even survives as the leading candidate because he has so much legal exposure. Those trials are happening right now. We saw a debate last night. Other candidates seem to do well. People responded to them. Who knows? Everybody seems to be hedging their bets on both sides. That if he is not able to run, then they have someone to stand in for him. We have someone on the Democratic side who a lot of people have misgivings about. I don't think they're fair, but you can't argue with reality.
Yeah.
People just feel nervous about Biden running again. So all of this is happening. We don't know what's going to happen. And also empires fall. If anybody who's ever picked up a history book knows that no empire stays at the top of the heap forever. They always fall. And that's part of what we study in history. Why did this thing that was so great fall apart? And that is a big part of the history lessons. The thing that I say to people, don't be part of it. Don't be part of the fall. Right? Nothing can last forever, but don't be the generation that allows the thing to crumble, even if it is the generation before you that created the problem.
Yeah.
Don't let it be on your watch. And I hate to use a scare tactic because I think that Black people particularly young Black people, have gotten to the point they don't respond as well to the scare. They don't respond as well to the guilt. They don't, your grandparents, marched for you to get a chance to vote. I think that's wearing thin for this young group of people. They respond more to power messages, and they found that a lot here in Georgia. The message is not like, oh, you be scared. The message is, oh, you have the power to show them that you can do this and you can do it again. That's why Raphael Warnock was reelected, because they were like, it's a fluke. And Black people said, no, it's not. And they showed up in the runoff and they voted and he won again. So that power message is more potent at this point among young people than a fear and guilt message. And I think that is really important for people who are organizing to understand.
Well, thank you so much again for your contributions. And I know that we'll be hearing from you again during this upcoming year. Do you have another book coming out right away, or?
My agent hopes so.
Well, the last one was good. Everybody check out the documentary. It is streaming on HBO like now, I think, isn't it?
No, it won't be until the end of the month.
Oh, the end of the month. Okay,
Yes,
we're in November. I've lost track of even where we are. The end of November. You don't want to miss it. Charles Blow, thank you so much for what you do, for all of your knowledge about all of this, and just the gift that you've given to all of us for so long now. Thanks so much. And come back again, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. And for everybody else out there, you have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself and somebody else. See you next time.